I didn't have much choice when I signed the lease. The price was unbelievably low. The landlord barely asked any questions. And the place, well, it didn't look so bad at first glance. Sure, the wallpaper peeled off in places, and the windows whined each time the wind picked up, but I'd lived in worse. I moved in on a Tuesday afternoon, dragging 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of kitchen stuff up the narrow stairway. The key turned with a dry click, and the door swung open without resistance. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old wood, and something I couldn't quite name. Almost like earth after rain, or like the breath of something that had been waiting too long. The first night was restless. Floorboards creaked under no weight, and shadows stretched farther than they should. I chalked it up to nerves, new place, new job starting tomorrow. But sometime past 3 a.m., I heard a noise I couldn't explain. A slow, scraping sound, as if furniture were being dragged across the floor in the next room. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The hallway outside my door was dark, lit only by the sickly orange glow of a single street lamp filtering through the window. I told myself it was nothing, maybe old pipes or settling beams. But the noise came again, closer this time. I got out of bed, stepped into the hallway, and found it empty. No furniture had moved. Nothing seemed out of place, except for one thing. The hallway felt longer, as if the walls had shifted subtly overnight, pushing the far end farther away. The next morning, I blamed the dream. Lack of sleep can do strange things to the mind. But as days passed, the oddities piled up. One evening, coming home from work, I unlocked the door and stepped into a corridor I didn't recognize. The walls were covered in faded floral paper, unlike the cracked yellow paint that had been there before. The corridor turned sharply left, where my living room should have been. I stood frozen, the door closing behind me with a soft, deliberate click. For a second, I wondered if I opened the wrong apartment, but my keys were still in the door, and my coat still hung on its familiar hook. I followed the hallway, each step echoing too loud, as if the walls themselves listened. At the end, I pushed open a door and found my living room, just as it had always been. But the air smelled different, like damp stone and old ashes. The next morning, the hallway was back to normal. But now I began to notice smaller things. My reflection in the hallway mirror lagged behind my movements by a fraction of a second. A stain on the ceiling grew overnight, branching like a spreading bruise. And every night, that scraping sound came back, closer and closer. Then the dreams started. Dreams of endless corridors twisting into darkness, of locked doors behind which something shifted, breathing heavily. In the dreams, the house was alive, hungry, waiting. One morning, I awoke to find fresh scratches on the inside of my bedroom door. Long, parallel marks, as if made by something with too many fingers. I checked my nails. They were short and clean. I lived alone. I tried to tell myself to move out, find a new place, lose the deposit, forget the whole thing. But every time I looked for apartments, something stopped me. I'd get headaches, or the website would fail to load. Once, I dialed a realtor's number, and all I heard on the other end was deep, rattling breathing. At night, the walls whispered. They spoke not in words, but in a slow, rising hum that crawled into my bones.
And still, every morning, the house looked perfectly normal, almost welcoming. The turning point came 2 weeks later. I woke up at dawn to find the living room door ajar. Beyond it, the corridor had changed again. It now stretched impossibly far, lined with doors I'd never seen before. And at the very end, in the half-light, something moved. I closed the door slowly, heartbeat echoing in my skull. For the first time, I realized it wasn't that the house was changing. It was showing me more of itself. Room by room, hallway by hallway, drawing me deeper inside. And I was starting to understand something terrible. The front door wasn't an exit anymore. It was just another door, leading further in. For days after that dawn, I tried to pretend nothing had changed. Wake up, go to work, come back, eat something tasteless, fall into uneasy sleep. But the door at the end of the corridor haunted me. Even when it was gone the next morning, I still saw it when I closed my eyes. Slightly ajar, with something shifting behind it, just out of sight. My neighbors, if I had any, never made a sound. No footsteps on the stairwell, no voices through the walls. The building felt hollow, like an abandoned shell. And yet sometimes at night, I heard what might have been footsteps in the apartment above. Slow, deliberate, matching my own heartbeat. One evening, after the longest day at work I could remember, I came home to find the kitchen different. The table, usually pushed up against the window, stood in the center of the room. A chair faced it, waiting, and on the table lay something wrapped in brown paper. My name was scrawled on top in black ink, letters trembling as if written by an unsteady hand. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was an old key, iron, heavy and cold to the touch. No note, no explanation. Just the key. The scraping sounds in the walls grew louder that night. They didn't stop when I covered my ears with a pillow. It was as if the house wanted me to hear them. I tried leaving again the next morning, bags packed, heart pounding, but when I opened the door to the stairwell, it wasn't the stairwell at all. Instead, I saw another hallway, longer than any in the building should be. Wallpaper hung in damp strips. The floor sagged under invisible weight. At the end stood a door that pulsed faintly in the gloom, like something breathing. I closed the door, hands shaking, and found myself back in my apartment. My bags were still by the door, useless. That night, I dreamed of the key. In the dream, I held it in my hand, and a door appeared in the living room wall. A door that hadn't been there before. It had no handle, only a keyhole, waiting. Behind it, I heard whispering. Dozens of voices layered over each other, rising and falling like waves. I woke up, drenched in sweat, and found the key still on my nightstand. But now, when I walked into the living room, I saw a faint outline on the wall, the shape of a door. It hadn't been there yesterday. Every night after that, the outline grew clearer. The paint peeled away around it, revealing cracked wood beneath. It was as if the house itself was pushing the door through the wall, guiding it into being. And still, the whispers came, sometimes just as I was falling asleep, sometimes in the softest moments of dawn. I couldn't make out words, but I felt them in my chest, a promise or a threat. Desperation took over. I called my old friends, tried to explain what was happening. My voice sounded thin and unconvincing, even to myself. Most didn't answer. The few who did laughed awkwardly, made excuses, promised to visit, but never did. Deep down, I wondered if they'd even heard me. Maybe the house decided what could pass through its walls, even phone calls. One night, the key began to feel warm in my pocket, like it wanted to be used. The whispering grew frantic, twisting into a pleading hum that set my teeth on edge. I couldn't sleep. At 3 a.m., I got up, walked into the living room, and stood before the outline of the door. The air smelled like earth and rust. I pressed the key to the wood. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, an ancient lock formed under the pressure of the key's cold iron teeth, as if the wall itself surrendered to it. The key turned on its own, and the door swung inward. Beyond it lay darkness, deeper than night, deeper than forgetting. And in that darkness, something moved. I should have shut the door. I should have run. But instead, I stepped closer. The whispers grew louder, urgent, almost welcoming. I saw shapes in the dark, tall, impossibly thin figures shifting just beyond the threshold. Then the door slammed shut in my face, the lock clicking shut again. The whispering stopped, cut off as if it had never been there. I staggered back, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The living room was quiet again, unchanged, except for the door, now fully formed in the wall, a part of the apartment. The key in my hand felt heavier, colder. And I knew, without knowing how, that door would open again, but next time it wouldn't close until something or someone had crossed through. Days blurred into nights after that. I barely left the apartment, afraid of what might be waiting in the hall, and even more afraid of what would happen if I wasn't here when the door opened again. It felt like the walls themselves were breathing, each exhale brushing cold air across the back of my neck. At first, I tried to convince myself it was madness, hallucinations brought on by exhaustion, stress, loneliness. But deep down, I knew better. Madness couldn't make doors appear in solid walls. The whispers changed. They became clearer, teasing the edges of words I almost understood. Sometimes they sounded like my own voice, twisted and echoing. Sometimes they sounded like someone I'd known long ago, a lost friend, or maybe my mother calling from rooms I hadn't dared remember. And every night, the figures behind the door grew bolder. At first, they stayed hidden in the shadows. But then, late one night, as I lay half awake, I saw them through the crack where the door didn't quite close. Two tall, thin shapes, faces hidden, hands pressed to the inside of the wood, as though they were testing its strength. I couldn't look away. My chest tightened until I thought I'd faint. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they were gone. The next morning, the door was gone too, just an unmarked patch of cracked plaster on the wall. But the outline was still there, faint as a bruise. I stopped going to work. My phone died, and I didn't bother to charge it. Calls wouldn't get through anyway. Outside, the city might have still existed, but inside this apartment, time felt warped, stretched thin until it barely held together. One night, I dreamed of the house itself. In the dream, it wasn't my apartment, but something much larger. Endless corridors, staircases that curved back on themselves, doors that led into rooms full of dust and nothing else. In every shadow, something watched me. And everywhere, I heard the same whisper, "We've been waiting." I woke on the living room floor, the key clutched in my fist so tightly it had cut into my palm. The door was back again, darker and more solid than ever. That day, I sat before it for hours, waiting. The key lay beside me on the floor, humming with cold energy. The apartment seemed to lean inward, like the walls were bending closer to listen. At dusk, the lock clicked on its own. The door creaked open a few inches, revealing blackness that seemed to ripple like water. The whispers swelled, 100 voices layered into a single urgent plea. Against every instinct, I crawled closer, drawn by the impossible promise of answers. I peered inside, heart hammering.
This time, I saw what lay beyond. A narrow hallway lit by a light that didn't come from any bulb or lamp. The walls were covered with peeling wallpaper, the pattern moving as if alive. And at the end of the hallway stood a mirror, old and cracked, its glass shifting like liquid. In its reflection, I didn't see myself. I saw the figures, tall, featureless shadows watching me from behind. I recoiled, breath caught in my throat. The door swung wider, inviting me in. The whispers grew frantic, almost desperate. But something inside me, a final spark of caution or fear, held me back. Instead of stepping through, I slammed the door shut. The key twisted in the lock by itself, sealing it. Silence fell over the room, heavy and absolute. For a few moments, I thought I'd beaten it, that maybe the house would stop. Then the floor beneath me creaked, the boards shifting as if something heavy moved below. A soft, deliberate knock came from the other side of the door. Once, twice, 3 times. That night, I didn't sleep. In the days that followed, the house changed faster. Doors appeared and vanished. Once I opened what I thought was my bathroom door and found a staircase spiraling down into darkness. Another time, the kitchen window looked out, not onto the courtyard, but onto a fog-shrouded forest I'd never seen before. The apartment no longer obeyed any logic I knew. It felt alive and hungry. I stopped eating. My reflection in the cracked mirror by the front door grew thinner, hollower. My eyes looked like someone else's. The whispers grew more confident, words becoming clearer. "Let us in. We can show you. You belong here." Part of me wanted to listen. The loneliness gnawed at me until even fear felt better than emptiness. One night, exhausted beyond thought, I unlocked the door again. The figures were waiting, closer than before, hands reaching out. I stepped forward, close enough to see that they weren't entirely shadows. They had eyes, dark and glistening, watching me with impossible patience. They didn't speak aloud, but I felt their words inside my head. "Come, see what lies beyond." The hallway beyond the door pulsed with living darkness, the walls breathing like lungs. It smelled of wet stone and forgotten places. I almost crossed the threshold. Then I remembered who I was, or who I used to be. The person who still hoped there was a world outside these walls. I stumbled back, slamming the door so hard the whole apartment shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. The key in my hand burned my palm, as if punishing me. The whispers turned cold, disappointed, fading into silence. The next morning, the door was gone again, but I knew it would return. And each time it would be harder to resist. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closer. Outside, the city was a memory, fading like a dream I couldn't quite recall. The figures were waiting. And deep down, part of me knew, someday I would open the door again. And this time, I wouldn't close it. I stopped counting days. Time had become a liquid thing, pooling in the corners of the apartment, slipping through my fingers when I tried to hold on to it. The clocks on the walls froze at odd hours, or spun so fast that the hands blurred into circles. The door returned, of course. It always did. And each time it felt closer to the center of my world, as if everything outside the frame of its blackened wood was less real, less solid.
One night, the whispers changed again. They weren't calling to me from behind the door anymore. They were inside the apartment, slipping around the furniture, coiling in the shadows. I heard them in the kitchen as I stood by the cracked sink, in the hallway as I moved past the peeling wallpaper. Why wait? Why hide? It's already inside you. That last whisper clung to me like cobwebs. I tried to ignore it, but each time my eyes drifted to the door, my pulse quickened with something that felt too close to longing. I found myself pacing in circles, as if drawn by an invisible leash. The key never left my pocket, heavy as a stone. At night, I dreamed of the apartment opening up, walls crumbling outward to reveal endless corridors beyond, lit by dying bulbs that flickered and popped. In every doorway stood the figures, taller than before, faces hidden but watching. Sometimes I woke to find myself standing by the door, the key halfway to the lock. I started talking to the apartment. I'd catch myself whispering to the walls, apologies, bargains, demands. "Let me go," I'd say, pressing my palm to the cracked plaster. "Please, let me leave." The walls answered in silence. But behind that silence, I felt amusement. The apartment wasn't keeping me here. I was keeping myself. Food ran out. The water from the tap turned rusty, staining my hands and the cracked plates in the sink. I stopped trying to clean. The smell of dust and mold filled the rooms. Yet the door remained clean, untouched by decay, the black paint smooth and cool under my fingertips. One night, I gave in. I unlocked. This time, the hallway beyond was longer, darker. The figures were gone, but I felt them, behind me, beside me, waiting. I stepped through. The door closed behind me with a soft click, sealing me in. I turned back, but there was no handle, no keyhole, only smooth black wood. The air smelled of earth and rot, damp stone, and something sweet beneath it all. I walked. The hallway twisted and narrowed, the wallpaper moving like it was breathing. At the end, a stairway spiraled downward, swallowed by darkness. My footsteps echoed, though the walls were close. The whispers followed, growing clearer with every step. Almost there. We've been waiting. See? At the bottom, I found a door like the first. Black, worn, waiting. I opened it. Beyond lay a room filled with mirrors, tall, tarnished glass set into heavy wooden frames. The floor was covered in dust, so thick my footsteps left deep trails. In the reflections I saw myself, but not as I was. In some, my face was blurred. In others, twisted by fear, hunger, or something darker. Then I saw them, the figures. They stood behind me in the mirrors, though when I turned, the room was empty. The whispers came from the glass itself now. Look. I stepped closer to the largest mirror. The reflection shifted. I saw the apartment, but changed. The walls pulsed with black veins. The windows bricked up. The door was open wide, and the figures streamed through, filling the rooms like living smoke. At the center of it all, I saw myself, holding the key, smiling. Not the smile of relief, the smile of belonging. I stumbled back. The glass cracked under my hand, lines spreading like frost. The whispers rose now, angry. Don't turn away. You know us. You are us. I ran. The hallway twisted behind me, longer than before. The walls closed in, nails and splinters tearing at my clothes. The stairway was gone. In its place, another door. Shaking, I unlocked it with the key. The apartment greeted me with silence. The door behind me dissolved into the wall. The figures didn't come out, but I knew they hadn't left. I sat on the floor, the key burning cold in my hand. Outside, the world felt distant, unreachable. The only real thing now was the door. The next morning, the mirrors from the room appeared in my living room. Not the same mirrors, but similar. Old, cracked, their surfaces crawling with movement. In the reflections, I sometimes caught glimpses of other rooms, rooms that didn't exist in my apartment. A child's bedroom, abandoned and dusty. A cellar, with chains on the wall. Hallways lined with doors just like mine. The figures moved between them, silent and patient. Days, or hours, I couldn't tell, passed like this. The whispers offered comfort now, not threats. You'll see, it won't hurt. At night, the door unlocked itself. Sometimes I found it ajar in the morning, blackness beyond. Each time I resisted, but each time it felt harder. My reflection in the mirrors grew less human. Shadows gathered round my eyes, my skin pale and thin. In some reflections, I saw the figures standing beside me, their hands resting on my shoulders. In one mirror, I saw myself turning the key, smiling that same terrible smile. And then, one night, it happened. I woke, standing by the door, the key already in the lock. The whispers didn't plead this time. They commanded, "Open it." And I did. The darkness beyond felt warmer than the apartment. The figures stood waiting, arms open. I stepped through. The apartment vanished behind me. The door dissolved into darkness. Ahead lay the endless hallways, the mirrors, the rooms where the walls breathed. And in the center of it all, a place meant for me. The whispers welcomed me home. Now you see. Now you belong. They didn't speak to me with words anymore. The whispers had become something deeper, threading through my thoughts, guiding my steps without sound.
The hallway I stood in stretched far beyond the shape of any real building. The floor felt alive under my feet, gently shifting like breathing earth. Light seeped from cracks in the ceiling, pale, trembling, never steady. I walked because there was nothing else to do. As I moved, I saw the rooms again, glimpsed through half-open doors. A bathroom lined with blackened mirrors, water dripping endlessly into a rust-stained tub. A library whose books whispered when I passed, pages turning on their own. A child's nursery where the mobile above the crib spun, though there was no breeze. In each room, reflections of me flickered in the glass, but none of them moved as I did. They watched, waiting. I found a staircase spiraling down, the wood groaning under my weight. At the bottom, another hallway, narrower, the walls pulsing with something like veins.
In the distance, a door, black but different from the others, the frame twisted, warped, as if it had grown rather than been built. I reached for the handle. The thought pressed into my mind, as heavy as stone. I lowered my hand. The door remained closed, but the presence beyond it pulsed with something enormous, ancient, hungry. I turned away, retracing my steps. The hallways changed behind me, reshaping themselves. I realized then the house wasn't just keeping me here. It was teaching me, breaking me down, rebuilding me into something it could use. The mirrors no longer frightened me. In their surfaces I saw the truth, the apartment, the key, even the figures, all pieces of something much larger, a living architecture of corridors, doors, and watchers. And I was becoming one of them. Days or hours, time was meaningless here, blurred into each other. I stopped eating, yet never felt hungry. I stopped sleeping, but never grew tired. The only constant was the pull toward the black door. Every corridor eventually curved back to it. Every mirror reflected its shape, looming behind me. The whispers grew clearer again. They spoke not just of welcome, but of purpose. The door must open, through you, for them.
One corridor ended in a gallery lined with portraits. All of them were of people I didn't know, yet something about them was familiar, a shared emptiness behind their eyes. At the center hung a canvas still wet with paint. My own face, pale, drawn, eyes hollow. The brush strokes around the mouth twisted into that same terrible smile. The paint on the chest dripped black, pooling on the floor. I reached out. My reflection in the canvas blinked. In the next room, I saw the figures again. This time, they stood in a circle, heads bowed. At their feet lay a door, cracked and broken. They turned toward me, and I felt not fear, but recognition. They were what waited beyond the black door. And so was I. Finally, the house let me approach the black door again. No whispers now, just the silent weight of expectation. I put my hand on the handle. The cold sank into my bones. The door opened inward. Beyond lay a vast chamber, ceiling lost in darkness, walls crawling with countless other doors. Each pulsed gently, like the beat of a heart. In the center, an empty space, waiting for a door to complete the circle. The key in my hand felt warm now, alive. It's time, the thought pressed into me. Become. I stepped forward, the walls shivered, doors creaking softly. As I reached the center, the floor opened. From below, something rose, a doorframe of living wood, still growing, twisting. I placed the key against it.
The door blossomed into being, black, but marked with veins of red light pulsing just under the surface. I understood then. The apartment, the hallways, the endless rooms, they were all parts of a single vast house, alive, hungry. It expanded through those who opened doors inside it. My door would be part of that growth, a new corridor, a new trap for another lost soul. The figures gathered around me, silent. As I turned the key, the door opened inward, blackness beyond, and in that blackness, movement, shadows twisting, reaching. They weren't calling me anymore. I was already theirs. I stepped through. The door closed behind me without a sound. In the dark, I felt myself dissolving, not dying, but becoming. The watchers welcomed me without words, and beyond me, far away, in some other corridor, I knew another door had appeared, waiting for someone else to find it. There is no time here, only rooms, endless rooms. When I stepped through the black door, I thought I had crossed some boundary. From victim to warden, from living to something else. But the truth is more cruel. I became both. The corridor behind me dissolved. Ahead, a vast hall spread into darkness, lined with mirrors. Tall, ancient, their glass fogged and cracked. In each I caught glimpses, myself as I once was, myself as I had become, and things I could not name, hunched and shifting. I wandered. The walls whispered not in words but in sensation, cold that pressed against the mind, warmth that meant danger. I learned to listen without ears, to see without eyes. Rooms unfolded, a ballroom where the chandeliers swayed though no wind stirred, a study whose books screamed if touched, a stairwell that spiraled infinitely downward, yet returned me to where I began. The house had grown, through me, through others before me, into something vaster than a city, alive with purpose. In a great hall of windows I finally saw them, the ones I had joined. Figures stood, unmoving, draped in the tatters of what they once wore. Their faces were pale, eyes black and depthless, mouths fixed in silent apology. Each watched over a door like the one I had opened. The watchers.
They were not masters, as I had thought. They were prisoners, guardians and bait, condemned to eternity, drawing in the curious, the lost, the desperate. At the center of the hall, a single window faced outward, but showed no sky. Instead, swirling shadows pressed against the glass, shapes that pulsed like veins. I understood then what lay beyond the house was worse than what lay within. The watchers stood not just to lure, but to hold the house together, to keep the darkness outside from pouring in. And now I was one of them. For a long time, days or centuries, there is no telling, I kept watch. Sometimes I glimpsed people in the mirrors, lost souls wandering hallways, clutching keys they barely understood. I whispered, without speaking, guiding them toward the black door. Some turned away, fleeing into endless corridors. Some, trembling, opened the door and stepped through, becoming part of the house, as I had. Each time the house shifted, growing larger, deeper, stranger. One day, if days still existed, I felt something different. A child, a boy, no more than 12, lost and terrified, clutching a broken camera as if it were a talisman. His fear fed the house. The walls leaned toward him, the mirrors trembled with anticipation. Yet the boy moved not with curiosity, but with desperate courage. He was searching, not for power, not for escape, but for someone he had lost. His mother. I whispered to him, as the watchers had whispered to me, "Come to the door."
But something in him resisted. His love burned like a small flame, pushing back the house's hunger. At the black door, he paused. His reflection in the glass shook his head, silently pleading. And he stepped back. The watchers around me shuddered in silent disappointment. The house strained, but could not force him. The boy turned and fled down a corridor that collapsed behind him. Yet he ran on, guided by hope rather than fear. In the mirrors, I saw him find a small door marked exit, the first I had ever seen. He pushed it open. Light spilled in. For the first time since I had become a watcher, I felt something like warmth, regret, memory. I remembered who I had been, the loneliness, the longing to belong, the mistake that had led me to open the door. And I remembered that choice had been mine. The black door before me pulsed, as if questioning, could I still choose? I reached out, and for a moment the handle felt solid, real. But when I turned it, nothing happened. The watchers do not leave. The house grew quiet. The boy was gone, safe, for now. But others would come, the curious, the broken-hearted, the greedy, and I would still be here, waiting, watching, whispering. Some nights I hear the distant echo of laughter, like a memory from another life. I hold on to it, not because it saves me, nothing can, but because it reminds me I was once human. And perhaps, somewhere deep in the labyrinth of corridors and mirrors, that spark of humanity still lingers. So if you ever find yourself in a forgotten hallway, staring at a black door and hearing a voice in your mind, know this: the house hungers, but the choice is still yours, for now.